This is Dr. Michael Cameron. This is the Registered Behavior Technician, Module 8. The specific strand that this is associated with is the Registered Behavior Technician, Module B01, and that falls into the assessment category. Just want to remind you that this training program is based on the Registered Behavior Technician task list, and it's designed to meet the 40-hour training requirement for the Registered Behavior Technician credential. And this program specifically is offered independent of the Behavior Analyst Certification Board. The title of this particular module is Describe Behavior and Environment in Observable and Measurable Terms. The duration is 60 minutes, similar to other modules that we've been through. And then, of course, at the end, there'll be a competency-based assessment, and that will consist of 5 questions. With respect to a demonstration, at the end of the module, I recommend that at the conclusion of this module, you ask your BCBA supervisor to collect inter-observer agreement data so that you can assess the accuracy of your data collection. So that will involve both you and the BCBA supervisor observing the same person, using the same operational definition of a behavior you may be observing, and then comparing notes at the end to ensure that you are accurately recording and that the way that you recorded is consistent with the way the BCBA supervisor was recording. I also recommend that you practice at the conclusion of this module identifying antecedents and consequences and detecting patterns among antecedents and consequences and in a behavioral presentation. And then finally, I recommend that you demonstrate your ability to analyze the circumstances that may be giving rise to aberrant behavior or also to adaptive behavior and appropriate behavior as well. With respect to the goals of this particular module, first it will be to discuss your data collection responsibilities as a registered behavior technician. Now recall, one of the hallmarks of behavior analysis is database decision making. So this is a very important responsibility that you have, because it's through your data collection that the board certified behavior analyst is able to evaluate whether or not programs are working. What programs? Well, behavior intervention plans, skill acquisition programs. That person can only make a determination regarding effectiveness based on the data that you're providing. And then, of course, that information gets communicated to other stakeholders as well. So that's one of the first goals of this module. The second goal is to describe to you the behavior analysis process. I just want to make sure that you're well anchored in terms of how this process unfolds and the steps that we follow. I also want to remind you that I've mentioned in a previous module the book, How to Think Like a Behavior Analyst. It's just a great volume. Highly recommend that if you haven't purchased it or looked at it yet, that you do consider that and use that as a supplement to your RBT training. The third specific goal for this module is to discuss why we put such an emphasis on data collection. And once again, it's because of our commitment to database decision making that we put such value on data. The fourth objective of this module is to describe the antecedent behavior consequence recording methodology, also affectionately known in our field as ABC recording. So we'll be spending time on that. And then finally, the fifth objective is to provide an overview of yet another tool we use to identify patterns in the environment, and that's referred to as the scatter plot. Now, with respect to the behavior analysis process, one of the things that I like to do is to always acknowledge those people in the field who I feel have made huge contributions to the field of behavior analysis. And one such person would be Dr. John Lutzker out of Georgia State University. Dr. Lutzker has done a lot of writing and publishing and has talked a lot about the ecology and how our behavioral ecology can impact the behavioral presentations of individuals. And he's given us a lot of systems to use in order to detect what in the ecology is actually impacting a person. So I just want to acknowledge his work. And if you have the opportunity to read any of his literature, his books or publications, highly recommend that you do that. But with respect to the behavior analysis process, there are essentially 6 steps that we follow. The first step is that we describe the problem that we're looking to address in what's referred to as behavioral terms. And I'll spend a little bit of time defining that for you in a moment. But we need to have real clarity in terms of what we're looking at, what we're trying to change. The second step in the entire process involves conducting assessments. And I've already mentioned assessments, and you're about to come in contact with a more extensive module on assessment. But we need to conduct functional behavior assessment, skill-based assessments, as well, and strength-based assessments. So we need to identify the person's behavioral excesses, their behavioral deficits, and also their behavioral assets as well. So the assessment piece is critical, because that then drives our focus in terms of what we should be focusing on, and what behaviors we should be selecting as targets. And that's our third step. We're actually going through the prioritization process. We're identifying the target behaviors. We're looking to put an emphasis on those things that will be meaningful, that if a particular behavior is decelerated, it could be a behavioral excess, for example, then that will shift a person's quality of life. Or if a particular behavior is accelerated, increased, so that may be a skill that we're working on, then that will shift the person's quality of life. So we go through this process of prioritizing just exactly what our focus is going to be. And the team is going to be part of that process, and a big voice on that team is the family. They will be clear in hopefully contributing here, and doing so with clarity in terms of what is important to them. And then there's other professionals involved with individuals that we work with as well. So if you're in a school-based system, for example, it could be a speech and language pathologist, an occupational therapist, a physical therapist. There's any number of people that will also have their recommendations in terms of what behaviors should be targeted for change. So that is the third step. The fourth step is establishing behavioral objectives. So we have to set our marks, set our sights on what we're hoping to achieve. And once we've accomplished that, then we move into the fifth phase, the fifth step, and that is the responsibility to devise and implement behavior change programs. So the behavior change program could take the form of a behavior intervention plan, or it could take the form of a skill acquisition program. But we're designing our interventions and then putting them in place. And then finally, logically, the sixth step is that we're going to evaluate the behavior change that's actually occurred. So that is the behavior analytic process, and you'll be part of that process. As a registered behavior technician, you will be instrumental in doing things every step of the way in terms of describing behavior in behavioral terms and conducting the assessments. You'll be able to aid that board-certified behavior analyst and other professionals in terms of conducting assessments, and you'll play an appropriate role there. Then you'll be part of the process of selecting the target behaviors, then establishing the behavioral objectives, and assisting with the development and implementation of the programs that will be designed to create behavior change. And then you'll be part of the process of helping evaluate whether or not the programs were effective or not. So those are the 6 steps that we routinely follow in the field of behavior analysis to support another individual. Now, as a registered behavior technician, one of the things that you will do is essentially the work of a sleuth. You are looking for and trying to detect patterns in relationships that are occurring between environmental events and a person's behavioral presentation. Now, it doesn't matter what kind of science you're interested in. You could be interested in anthropology, you could be interested in sociology, you could be interested in psychology, you could be interested in some of the hard sciences, biology, for example. We go through this process in science of describing what we're looking at, trying to explain what we see, and then as a result of the description and the explanation, we get into this business of predicting what will occur and then ultimately controlling. And when I use the word control, I mean so in a benevolent way. We are controlling behavior for the benefit of the individual, not for the benefit of other people, but for the direct benefit of that individual. So there's a benevolence, there's a caring, there is a desire to shift quality of life for an individual. So when we talk about the control of behavior, it's for the benefit of the person that we're supporting and serving. But that is a scientific process. We describe, we explain, we predict, and we control. And you'll be involved in each one of those processes. Now, with respect to the definition of a behavior, there is a standard that we follow, and the definition has to hit these 3 points. First of all, we need to maintain objectivity, and that refers to focusing on the observable characteristics of a behavior or the events in the environment that can be observed. This is something that we put a big emphasis on. The second requirement is that we have clarity. So the definition is so clear that another person that's unfamiliar with the behavior could observe, and they would record it the same way that we are recording. So we need to have consistency in terms of measurement. In order to get consistency in measurement, we have to have clarity with respect to our behavior. And then finally, we need what's referred to as completeness, and that the boundaries of the behavior are clearly delineated so that the responses can be easily included or excluded from the definition. So let me just give you a quick example. One of the things that I mentioned in one of the very first modules is that I have a dog, and the dog's name is Sky, and she has a big title, and her breed is what's referred to as a Petite Basset Griffon Vendine, also known as a PBGV. And one of the things that Sky likes to do is to bark at the other dogs in the neighborhood, specifically the pit bulls in the neighborhood. So our house in Los Angeles sits up on a hill. And one of the things that Sky likes to do is to go out into the garden area to look at the pit bulls at the base of the hill, at the home that's at the lower part of the road, and to look over into the yard where there are 2 big pit bulls, and she barks at them, and she likes to do that, and I would even consider it a reinforcer, actually. So with respect to the definition of a behavior, my requirement, if I was trying to get another person to assist me in terms of measuring the behavior, is that I would have to provide a good operational definition of barking, and I would have to do that in such a way so that the definition is clear, so that another person unfamiliar with Sky would be able to observe and record the same behavior that I'm recording. And then with respect to completeness, the behavior has to be clearly delineated so that the responses can be easily included or excluded. So the question becomes, what sound does Sky make that is not a bark? And what sounds does Sky make that fall into the category of a bark? So I'd have to be clearly providing information along that line to ensure that I get good, accurate recording between myself and another person. So a good definition has these dimensions. We've got objectivity, we've got clarity, and we've got a completeness in terms of the measure. So in the work that you do, doesn't matter if we're working with a human, we are working with an animal. Our requirement is to provide good, clear definitions of the behaviors that we're targeting for change. Now, we have to put equal emphasis on the environment because we're also in the business of describing the environment as well. So not only the behavior that we're looking at and potentially trying to change, but also the environment in which the person operates and the environment that may be impacting the person. So what are we looking for in the environment? Well, we're considering the setting in which a person is functioning and perhaps behaving. You know as well as I do is that settings matter. So the way that you present yourself as an individual in one context, let's say at a cafe or a bistro or a bar, for example, could be much different from the way you present yourself in a religious environment. So for example, a Catholic church or synagogue or a Buddhist temple, for example. So your presentation can be different from one setting to another. So we can say that the setting has an influence on your behavior. And you certainly know that to be true about yourself. Even going into a grocery store. You know, some people going through this series as a registered behavior technician may have a fair amount of anxiety as a result of being in public places. And there may be a grocery store that is crowded. You know, people are in close proximity. People are not very careful with the carriages and the carts that they're pushing around. And that could create a fair amount of anxiety for you. So that particular setting can impact your behavior. So these are the kinds of things that we're looking at. You know, what impact does a setting have on an individual? It could be a classroom, a grocery store, or a place of worship, for example. Another variable is the presence or absence of other people. So just as a result of somebody being present or absent, that could have an impact on your behavior. There are people in your own life, for example, that when they are present may bring out the best in you. And your behavioral presentation and their presence may be different from when they are not there. So in that case, we would say that the environment involving other people has influences on your behavioral presentation. Another variable or cluster of variables in the environment that can impact behavior include sounds, for example, visual stimuli, also motion in the environment. With respect to sounds, perhaps you're an individual with a high level of sensitivity to sound. Maybe you don't particularly like the sound of a siren from a police car or a siren from an ambulance. Or a fire truck, for example. So just the presentation of that sound can impact your behavioral presentation. I happen to really dislike the sound of leaf blowers, especially leaf blowers outside of my window at home. There are certain communities in California that have prohibitions against leaf blowers. For example, in Santa Monica, you can't even use a leaf blower, and I kind of like that personally. So the sound of a leaf blower can impact your behavior. The sound of a siren can impact your behavior. Also, visual stimuli. Once again, I mentioned to you that I live in Los Angeles, and not so long ago I came home and got out of my car and stepped on the sidewalk and looked down and noticed that there was graffiti on the sidewalk. So that visual stimuli immediately impacted my behavioral presentation, impacted the way I interacted with other people, and impacted a lot of things about my behavioral presentation. And then it also impacted what was important to me and what my priorities were as well. Because as soon as seeing the graffiti on the sidewalk, I just proceeded to go online and file for a request to have the graffiti removed by the city, which they did promptly. to my delight. So sounds will impact you, visual stimuli will impact you, motion will impact you. Anybody here going through the modules that happens to dislike being a passenger in a car? Maybe you're in the back seat, maybe you're a passenger, maybe you don't like that motion, or you don't like the motion of a boat, or you don't like the motion of an airplane. Certainly there are people here going through the modules that dislike air travel exactly for that reason. You don't like the pressure in your ears as a result of the altitude. You don't like the motion of the airplane, especially when there's turbulence or chop in the atmosphere. That motion may be something that impacts your behavioral presentation as well. What kind of presentation? Perhaps grabbing the person's hand that is sitting next to you. Maybe that person is a stranger. Maybe that person is familiar to you. But it will affect your behavioral presentation. Also, demands in the environment can impact you. Demands and expectations that may be imposed. We've got a number of things. You know, the setting will impact you. Other people, their presence or absence will impact you. Sounds, visual stimuli, motion, demands and expectations that are imposed. But there's also what's referred to as biological setting events, and there's a biological context as well. So for any of you folks going through this Registered Behavior Technician series that may suffer from migraines, for example, you know that the onset of a migraine will affect your behavioral presentation. Maybe during the process of having a migraine, you become very intolerant of sound, you become very intolerant of light, you become very intolerant of smells even. So one of the things that you will do is sort of sequester yourself. You may go into a darkened room, put something on your head, over your eyes, and try to block out all those sensations, those smell sensations, sound sensations, visual sensations as well. There's a great article that's been published. It was back in 2003, and the title of the article is Menstrual Discomfort as a Biological Setting Event for Severe Problem Behavior. And the article focused on assessment and intervention. And that article was written by Ted Carr and his colleagues. And one of the things that they demonstrated to us is that something that every female experiences, and that is the menstrual cycle, the discomfort associated with that can be a biological setting event, and it can set the occasion for particular forms of problem behavior. For people with disabilities, even people without disabilities, it will have that impact. So we're looking at biological context as well. Could be a migraine. It could be the menstrual cycle. It could be blood glucose level. It could be the introduction of pharmacological agents in your body. It will impact your biology, and your biology will impact behavior as well. So when we're describing the environment, we're looking at the external environment, things outside of our skin, but we're also considering things inside of our skin as well. What things outside? Well, the setting, people, sounds, visual stimuli, motion, demands, expectations. What kinds of things internally? It could be migraine. It could be a person with diabetes whose blood glucose level is dysregulated, and those are the kinds of things that can impact the behavior in a person significantly, as you know. Now, with respect to why we describe behavior and why we spend so much time discussing this, it's important that we do that so that we can collect accurate information about behavior. So we need good operational definitions, we need good descriptions, we need good reliability from one person to the next, so that we can be assured that we're collecting accurate information. We also do it so that we can document the interactions between the environment and a person's behavior. So the more clarity we have in terms of the behavior that we're looking at, the more clarity we have in terms of kind of environmental events that may be impacting the individual, the better we will be at documenting those interactions. We also do it so we can design appropriate interventions and so that we can determine whether behavior changes once interventions are introduced. So these are the things we're trying to accomplish, and that's why it's so important to us to describe behavior with a great level of accuracy. Now, the other thing that you will be doing as a registered behavior technician is essentially following a scientific method. And the scientific method is simply a framework for the systematic exploration of patterns in the world. And the behavior analytic process is an incremental process that involves collecting information about behavior and the environment, identifying patterns that may be forming, and then to provide explanations in terms of why those patterns are occurring, and then testing our hypothesis about the behavior that we've targeted for change. So as a registered behavior technician, you'll be assisting with this entire process, and it's a very exciting process as well. Now let me give you a little case study just to bring some meaning to everything that we've been talking about so far. So I'll use a fictitious name, real student, but a fictitious name. Just call him Vahe. And his age is 13, an adolescent in a middle school. And the behavior of concern, one that I was asked to consult on, is what's referred to as emesis. You and I also know this to be vomiting, but the formal term for it is emesis. And of relevance, Vahe had a medication regimen at the time I was working with him a number of years ago. And the medication regimen involved the use of Abilify, Zoloft, and also Ativan. So the vomiting was occurring on a regular basis, and it was of great concern to the family. The vomiting was very stigmatizing. Vahe was teased, actually not just teased, he was bullied as a result of his vomiting. He was called names by other individuals, very unattractive things, and it was of great concern to Vahe and also to his family. By the way, Vahe has a diagnosis of autism spectrum disorder. He would fall into the category of a high-functioning individual. His intelligence was in the gifted category, so he was way above normal in terms of his intelligence. Very, very smart young guy, falling into the gifted category, but meeting the criteria for autism spectrum disorder as defined by the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual, 5th edition, and very bright kid. So the questions that I had included, first, what classes occur within the high-frequency timeframes, for the vomiting? And then what people did Vahe come in contact with during the high-frequency timeframes? And also what demands were imposed during this time. So in order to make that determination, I worked with a person that's a registered behavior technician, and we collected data on Vahe across a period of time. And what you're looking at here is a data collection grid, and you see on the left-hand side in the column the days of the week. So you got Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, of course. And then on the row on the very top, we got times a day. So from 7 o'clock in the morning until 8, 8 to 9, 9 to 10, 10 to 11, 11 to 12, 12 to 1, 1 to 2, 2 to 3. And during the course of the week, we recorded the occurrences of vomiting. So we had a good operational definition. We had clarity, objectivity, completeness in terms of the definition of the behavior that we were looking at. And this is the pattern that we detected. So you see it as clearly as I do, right? So from 7 o'clock in the morning until 8, the total occurrences out of the aggregate was just 11%. So pretty reliably, absolutely reliably, once each morning, you would get vomiting every day of the week on one occasion. And then between 8 and 9, every day except Thursday, and then and that accounting for 9% of all occurrences. And then from 9 to 10, Tuesday, Thursday, and Friday, accounting for 9% of all occurrences. But look what happens between 10 and 11, 11 to 12. Okay, 52% of all vomiting is occurring right within this time frame. And then from 12 to 1, just 11%, and then 1 to 2, 6%, and then look at 2 o'clock, right before leaving at the end of the day, that 2 to 3 p.m. hour, 0%. Nothing happens there. But 52% between 10 and 11 and 11 to 12. So what's going on, during this time frame? What environment is Vahe in? Who are the people present? What are the activities that that he's engaged with? What kind of demands are being imposed on him? And as a result of doing his functional behavior assessment, one of the things that we determined that Vahe was a highly anxious kid. And he was very fearful of social environments, especially the cafeteria. So one of the things that became clear to us is that leading up to cafeteria time, which was at about, I think it was 11:20 every day, 11:15, 11:20, he would get highly anxious about having to go into the cafeteria. Why? Because he did not like the social interactions. He did not like being with same age, typically developing peers. He was highly uncomfortable being in that environment. It was unstructured. There was no formality to it like in his regular classes there was. So it was something that he just did not like. So from 10 to 11, 11 to 12, we start seeing an escalation in the emesis. So one of the things that we determined is that we would probe and explore the possibility of Vahe having lunch elsewhere, not going into the cafeteria, but rather going into a private room, a classroom that was vacant at the time of lunch, and to invite some of his preferred peers to come in and have lunch with him. And that's how we started the intervention for Vahe. And sure enough, as soon as we put that intervention in place, the emesis was eradicated. We completely eliminated the vomiting during all hours during the day. And then finally, we built a little bit of a peer group around him, and then we ultimately took that entire peer group and transported them all into the cafeteria. They all sat at the same table, so we kind of had the comfort of that peer group. And that is the beginning point of his programming. So that all came as a result of good data collection, and using this system, which I'll describe more in a few moments, for the purpose of supporting our analysis. So with respect to our approach, I know I've talked to you about the behavioral analytic approach. There's a methodology that we're following here, and it involves direct observation. In Vahe's case, it involved the emesis and the vomiting, and looking at the particular behavior in the natural environment, because that's where it's occurring, right? It was occurring in the context of the classroom. He tried to run to the bathroom, but wasn't always successful. So it always started in the classroom. So that's where the observation occurred, right, in the classroom. And we had clarity in terms of the behavior that we're looking at, and we did it in the context of the natural environment. And this is something that is very important, is that whenever we have a referral and somebody's asking us to solve a particular problem, it is our responsibility to get into that environment where the problem's occurring. So it could be on a school bus, it could be in the context of the cafeteria, it could be in the hospital setting, for example, or clinic. Many of you here will be working in a variety of different venues, or it could be in a home-based setting. And the time of day will be a driver as well. Perhaps the behavior problem that we're concerned with is occurring in the morning hours, right before, during this process of the person getting ready for school. I've spent plenty of time in families' homes at 7 a.m., even earlier than 7 a.m., specifically because that is when the problem was occurring. So our approach always involves this direct observation in the natural environment, and we're going into that observation process with good clarity in terms of our definition. So the components, so this is all coming together for us. In terms of the components of a good approach, first, we're relying on data collection. Next, we're just ensuring that the person that we're working with is engaged in activities that are appropriate to their situation and the appropriate to their context as well. So with anybody that we're working with, we want to make sure that there's environmental enrichment, that there's planned activities, that they're doing those things that are essentially contributing to their quality of life. Then we need to ensure that the treatment strategies that we select for the person actually match their developmental skill and are not demeaning. So going back to Vahe for a minute, the intervention that we selected, which was to have him excused from the cafeteria and to have him eating in an alternate environment, vacant classroom, with preferred peers around him, was something that was not demeaning at all. It was something that his family embraced, his family wanted, and Vahe certainly wanted it as well. So we're following these steps. You know, we're committed to data collection. We're committed to the person's active engagement in their environment, and in Vahe's case, a school. We're committed to treatment strategies that are dignified, that are socially appropriate, developmentally appropriate, and intellectually matched as well. And that was certainly the case with Vahe. Now, there's three other components that I really want to bring to your attention as well. In developing plans, there are many people that may be involved with services and the coordination of services for an individual. So other team members may include a speech and language pathologist, an occupational therapist, or a physical therapist, or a school psychologist or a social worker. And in Vahe's case, there was a community-based psychiatrist that I consulted, and I wanted to make sure I got their input as well. So always be aware that there are other people that will have a different perspective from you, and even from the board-certified behavioral analyst that you're working with. And it's always our responsibility to really gather the information from different people, other professionals, so that we're fully informed in terms of how we should be thinking about the treatment for an individual. And then, of course, the family. Always looking for their input, their insights, their information, their recommendations, because that will inform us as well in terms of the best direction. So in Vahe's case, I spent a lot of time working with, as I mentioned, the community-based psychiatrist, but also with his family. I wanted to make sure that whatever I was deciding, recommending for Vahe was consistent with the family values and the family's conceptualization of the way he should be in his community school. Now, the fifth component that we're always aware of and should be aware of is the biobehavioral component. And in this case, Vahe had 3 medications, if you recall: Abilify, Zoloft, Ativan. And curiously, some of those medications cause nausea. So I suspect that something was going on with respect to a medication effect, and that's specifically why I work so closely with the community-based psychiatrist. So there is a biobehavioral component as well. And then finally, you know, one of the final requirements we have is we're always programming for generalization. So whatever interventions that we have in place, we want to make sure that we are promoting generalization of the effect. And we specifically have to do that. We'll have an entire module that's devoted to the identification and use of procedures for promoting generalization. One such procedure is what's referred to as programming common stimuli. And I'll just tell you a quick story there in terms of generalization programming. One young boy that I worked with, about Vahe's age, was somebody who his family wanted to bring to the grocery store on a regular basis. They really wanted him to assist in terms of doing an inventory at home, in terms of what was needed, and also going to the grocery store and assisting with the purchasing of the items on the shopping list. So in order to do that, I actually created a board game. I went to his community grocery store, and these are pictures that are representative of that store. And what I did is I took pictures of each of the aisles, and for each of the aisles, as you know, there's a listing of the things that you'll find in that aisle. So aisle 4, for example, in this grocery store was a place where you'd find canned foods like beans and soups, and also ethnic foods as well, and prepared foods as well were in that aisle. So I essentially made a board game out of this, and we rehearsed shopping on the board game, and these visual stimuli were actually on the board. So it was a game that we played. It was the shopping trip game, and his requirement was to move his figure to various locations in the store on this board game, and to go and purchase items from these various aisles. So this is what's referred to as programming common stimuli. Well, what does that mean? Well, you're actually taking the stimuli that the person will come in contact with in their natural environment and using that for the purpose of instruction and training outside of the natural environment. So this occurred in his home. So we're going to talk a lot about programming for generalization and things that we can do to promote generalization, but that's another element that is our responsibility in terms of good effective programming. So those are the 6 things that are essentially important. So with respect to your scope of professional work, you are needed to assist with this entire process of discovering what's going to be effective for an individual with respect to their programs, their skill acquisition programs, their behavior intervention plans. So you'll be using tools in order to detect patterns and to make a determination as to what is influencing behavior. And 2 tools that you will use are the ABC recording methods that I'll tell you about, and also what's referred to as a scatter plot. These are 2 of the tools that you'll commonly use during your observation, and also if you're participating in the functional behavior assessment process with your board-certified behavior analyst supervisor, you'll certainly be asked to use these particular tools. So I'm going to give you a primer and a bit of an introduction on these tools. Some of you are already experienced as direct service providers and have already come in contact with these tools. But the ABC assessment is accomplished by essentially observing a person and recording anecdotal information across many observation periods. So the observer essentially records events right before the behavior of concern, and that's what's referred to as an antecedent. So those things that come before the behavior is an antecedent to the behavior. And then you're also recording the events that occur right after, and that's what's referred to as a consequence. And this process of antecedent behavior consequence recording helps us identify patterns that may be responsible for giving rise to behavior. We may be able to detect triggers for problem behavior and identify consequences that may be maintaining the problem behavior. Now, one of the things I want to mention here is the use of what's referred to as behavior intervention technology, also referred to as BITS. So the ABC recording method can be easily accomplished on various apps that can be used, also through data collection systems such as those available through Central Reach. Just excellent systems that are available there. But the use of technology is something that really facilitates this entire process. And the use of many apps and technology tools are useful because they also summarize the data for us. Now, one of the systems that I really like is in front of us here, and it's a quick ABC data form with duration measures as well as a possibility. So what you do with this particular form is on the left-hand side, going from left to right. In the left column, you're indicating the time of day. So let's go back to Vahe. So let's say it's 10 o'clock in the morning, or 11:20. Let's take 11:20 as the example. So the location. So you're prompted to circle just exactly what location the individual's in. Are they transitioning? Are they in the hallway? Are they in a classroom or a resource room? Are they outside in the playground? Are they in a computer lab? But look at here, for Vahe in the lunchroom. Okay, there we go. Or it could be a bathroom. Okay, what was the activity at the onset of the behavior? What was the person doing? So the registered behavior technician will just circle just exactly what the activity was at the onset of the behavioral episode and the presentation. And then you're making a selection in this next column titled Trigger and Antecedents. You're indicating what may have triggered the behavior. So you've got a menu of options here as well. It could be a task demand. It could be a transition from something that was highly preferred to something that wasn't so preferred. It could be an adult demand that occurred. And then what is the behavior that occurred? In this one, I would pencil in under the other category a mesis for Vahe. But it could be other things. It could be aggression. It could be self-injurious behavior. It could be noncompliance, taking the form of dropping to the floor. And then what was the consequence as a result? Well, people redirected him verbally, or he was allowed to escape. In Vahe's case, it was an escape that occurred as a result of vomiting. He was able to go into the bathroom, and then ultimately actually to the school nurse as well. And then you're recording what the duration is. So with this ABC data form, you're indicating time of day, the location, the activity at the onset of the behavior, what may have triggered or been an antecedent to the behavior, what was the actual behavior that you were tracking, what was the consequence that occurred, and what was the duration. And then you're putting your anecdotal notes in here as well in terms of comments that you have regarding your observation. So as a result of the repeated use of this ABC data collection form, you're able to begin detecting the patterns and then arriving at some potential conclusions, or not necessarily conclusions, but hypotheses in terms of what may be contributing to the onset of the behavior and the maintenance of the behavior as well. And this is what's referred to as ABC recording. Now, your board-certified behavior analyst supervisor will let you know whether they want to use this particular type of form, one that's pre-prepared like this, or whether they just want you doing just note-taking, where you're just asked to indicate the antecedents as you see them or perceive them, and the behavior that you're tracking, of course, is listed, and then the consequences that may follow will be recorded by you, as well as duration. So there's a variety of different ways of doing ABC recording, and your BCBA supervisor will certainly let you know what the preference is with respect to that. Now, the other tool that I mentioned to you is referred to as a scatter plot, and that is a chart or a grid where an observer records the events or a sequence of events that occurred during a given context. So with a scatter plot, we're specifically looking for correlations. We're looking for the correlation between time of day, physical setting, specific activities the person may be engaged in, or particular people that were present. And we're looking for relationships between those variables and a behavior that may be occurring on a regular basis. So this is an example of an activity scatter plot data sheet where you, as a registered behavior technician, would be required to write down the activity that may be occurring. And then you are using this data sheet for consecutive days. You can see the labels here: Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, and you can put the actual date in. Now look at the recording key as well. You're indicating that with a dark filled-in cell that the behavior actually occurred, or you're putting X through the box to indicate that it did not occur, or if you were unable to collect data, that you would leave the cell empty. So as a result of doing this, the actual pattern will essentially pop out at you. As a result of filled cells or X'd out cells, you'll be able to see exactly when the behavior was occurring, what activities they were associated with, what people they were associated with, or what time of day was associated with. And this is essentially what I did with Vahe. So the Vahe presentation and the data that I presented to you was essentially a scatter plot analysis of his behavior. So as a registered behavior technician, your BCBA supervisor is going to be asking you to do ABC recording and also scatter plot recording as well. And what is the reason? Once again, we're looking for patterns. Why are we looking for patterns? Because once we understand these relationships between the environment and behavior, then we can begin programming so that we can affect change in the person's behavior. Programming what? Perhaps doing something about the physical setting, perhaps doing something about the activities that we're asked the person to engage in, or doing something about the people that are present during the person's work, during the time that the person is engaged in various activities. Okay, so that concludes the overview here, and as we always do, at the end, I have some questions and answers. But we talked once again about BITs, and what are they? Well, they're behavioral intervention technologies. Why are they important and relevant here? Well, because with tools that are available through various apps, tools that can be used for ABC recording, tools that can be used for scatterplot analyses, tools that are available through companies such as Central Reach, can really create an efficiency in terms of what you do, and certainly create convenience in terms of what we do as well. With respect to the steps of the scientific process, well, we first describe things, then we explain, then we predict and we control. What do we mean by control? Not for any malevolent reason, but for a benevolent reason. We're doing that to enhance a person's quality of life. So we're doing it for their benefit. We're not doing it for our benefit or for the benefit of any other person other than the individual that we're supporting. One of your fundamental requirements as a registered behavior technician, data collection. Of course, data collection. And then what information you're gathering during your ABC recording? Well, you're recording information on antecedents, behaviors, and consequences. And then finally, what information are you gathering when constructing a scatter plot? Well, here we're looking at information on correlations between behavior, time of day, activity, people, and physical locations. So that concludes this module. Thank you for your attention, and I look forward to your progression.